Hello and welcome to Tech Deals. It's all well and good to make build videos and talk about what new PC you could put together. However, many of you simply want to upgrade an existing PC to get more life out of it. This is a 2018 build that I put together on the channel for $1,000 that was a solid deal at the time. And frankly, it's still perfectly useful today. However, it is getting long in the tooth in some respects, and if you built something like this back then, you may be ready to upgrade but are unsure of what makes sense. Today, I'm going to talk about what I'd upgrade on this PC, what I'd replace on it, and at what point is it worth just selling the entire machine and building a new one.
Today's video is brought to you by URCD Keys, the best source for Windows 10 and Office Professional product keys at deeply discounted prices, and we have got further discounts on those at the end of this video.
First, a recap on this PC and what was in it in 2018 that totaled up to $1,000. This featured the Ryzen 7 1700X CPU, 8 cores and 16 threads. 16 gigabytes of DDR4 3000 RAM, a 480 gigabyte SATA SSD boot drive, an EVGA DG76 case, yes, that's a mouthful, this one right here, an EVGA 500 watt 80 plus white power supply, and finally, an EVGA RTX 2070 black video card. The GPU was by far the most expensive item in the build at the time, having just launched for $500 at the time. The graphics card was 50% of the build budget, and part of the point of the build was to show what was possible at this price point. Now, a lot of compromises were made to get there. This is a good example of a build that really could have used another $200 towards secondary parts to cover future uses. It's worth noting that the 2060 Super did not exist at that time, or it would have been a logical choice for $400. A better long-term option probably would have been an RTX 2060 6GB GPU, which at the time was $350, which would have left another $150 more for the secondary items in this build. I do think it's worth noting that the cheapest used RTX 2070 for sale on eBay in April of 2022 is $450. And so if you had bought this in 2018, you really didn't lose much money after more than 3 years of ownership. Crazy times we live in indeed. Thankfully, RTX 30 series and Radeon 6000 series have finally dropped in price as of April of 2022. You can get a 3070 Ti or a 6700 XT for $700 or less, which all things considered isn't terrible. For sure, it's not great. These cards are a year old and they're still above MSRP, but that's just the world that we live in today. The primary issue here is that the 1700X is already a CPU bottleneck to the RTX 2070. I did a follow-up video to this build showing game benchmarks between the 3.5 GHz all-core stock clock and a 4.0 GHz all-core overclock on the 1700X, and in many cases, the RTX 2070 was being bottlenecked by the CPU regardless of the clock speed. More GPU won't help here if you don't also upgrade the CPU. So, is a 3070 Ti or a 6700 XT a noticeable upgrade over the RTX 2070 this machine was built with? Yes and no. The ray tracing performance is better on the 3070 Ti, and the 12 gigabytes of VRAM is very nice on the 6700 XT. The features and drivers are newer. They'll be supported for a longer period of time, but that's kinda it. Neither is mind-blowingly faster over the 2070. If you want an upgrade that will wow you, an RTX 3080 12 gigabyte card or RX 6900 XT 16 gigabyte card is what you really need. And yes, these are currently going for $1,000, which is as much as the entire original build cost. Things just cost more now. What can I say? Having said all of that, you could totally upgrade your CPU to something nicer and faster and keep the RTX 2070 until the 40 series or 7000 series launch. That is a perfectly reasonable option to consider as well. Do keep in mind that if you do upgrade today, you're getting back 90% of what you paid for your 2070 at current market prices. So there's that. If the 3070 Ti were $500 today and your 2070 were worth $250, which is where it really should be, then what's the difference? $250. If the 3070 Ti is $700 today and your 2070 is worth $450, what's the difference? $250. I'm noticing a trend and a pattern here. It's not so much how expensive new cards are, but what's the price difference between your old card and the new card. Who this really hurts are people who don't have a video card to sell in order to buy a new video card. But if you do have one, take a look at what it's currently worth, because you might find that upgrading isn't as expensive as it first might appear. In late 2018, you could buy the 1700X for $149, and that deal repeated in late 2019 for the 2700X, which dropped to the crazy price of $135 for Christmas of 2019. Now, the 1700X was a good CPU for its day, all things considered. However, it really is showing its age with lower clock speeds and lower instructions per clock. As noted, it holds back the 2070. It is not really worth putting anything faster in terms of a graphics card on the 1700X today. What would a solid CPU upgrade be? Well, if you want to stick with AMD, I can see two viable options: the Ryzen 9 5900X or the Ryzen 9 5950X. If you were a 1700X buyer back in 2018, you certainly wouldn't go down to 6 cores at this point. And while 8 Zen 3 cores is in fact an upgrade, it's not one with a huge future in front of it. This is the last of the AM4 CPUs. If you're going to stick with this, get something good enough to avoid having to switch platforms for a while if possible. AM5 is coming very soon, DDR5 and a bunch of other things. And so if you're going to go ahead and make an upgrade, make it one that's going to last you, hopefully for as many years as this one did, and 12 or 16 cores is where that's at. If, on the other hand, you want to move to Intel, the choices really become the i7-12700K or the i9-12900K, 12 or 16 cores, on a Z690 board that supports DDR4. Now, the details on which of those two CPUs might make sense for you and why is beyond the scope of this video, but they are solid options that will provide years of great performance, just as the pair of Ryzen 9 CPUs will as well. Speaking of CPU upgrades, let's talk about the motherboard. This was built with an Asus Prime X370 Pro, a lovely mid-price motherboard with good features for its day. It has received BIOS updates to support the latest Zen 3 CPUs, or at least it will boot with them installed. Now, what I'm about to say is bound to upset some AMD fanboys, but it needs to be said. There is a very large difference between two products being designed and engineered to work together from day one with a full suite of testing and product support to back them up, and two products that were made in different times, engineered for different platforms, and made to work together using some hot glue. The 300 and 400 series chipsets were made by AS Media, not AMD, in a time when a lot of people had no faith in AMD, when motherboard companies only made a few AMD boards and didn't always put their best features on them. They worked, but suffered for a long time from compatibility issues with RAM, adding cards, and some software. Now, over time, most of those issues were worked out, but not all of them. A good example is the ASRock X370 Gaming K Ford, which was one of the launch boards. I had one on my test bench for a while before replacing it because it never gained DDR4 3200 RAM support. ASRock actually retired that board early and replaced it with the Gaming X X370 board because of a design problem that prevented faster RAM from ever working. In the past few years, I've discovered that CPU upgrades on 300 and 400 series boards can be very hit and miss. It is better on the 400 series, they were improved. However, about half of the 300 series boards that I've tried to put Zen 2 on ended up bricked in one way or another. Now, most were recovered through BIOS flashbacks, etc. However, one MSI X370 board never was. I cannot stress this next point enough. Asus has posted a BIOS that officially supports Zen 3 CPUs on the Prime X370 Pro. But honestly, I have no faith in that working without a hitch. Okay, it'll probably boot, assuming it doesn't brick on updating if you're going from a launch BIOS to one 5 years later. Fun tip. Do several BIOS updates small chunks at a time. I've had several boards brick doing large BIOS upgrades from years ago in one go, but I've had more success doing several small updates. You're not supposed to have to do that, but I have had more success with it. That issue aside, even with official support, that doesn't mean that everything is going to work right. It doesn't mean that PBO will work right, that the RAM will work right, and that you won't end up with stutters or other performance impacts stemming from an ASUS trying to make a 4th generation CPU work on a 1st generation board. If you do want to upgrade the CPU, a 2700X would be lovely if you can find a good deal on one. Maybe try a 3700X if you're feeling brave. But if you want more than that, replace the board. As a bonus, you get some nice perks with the new board, including Gen 4 PCI Express support, better RAM support, more and faster USB support, more M.2 slots, and the assurance that you're buying a board that's meant to work with Zen 3. I imagine some of you are upset at hearing this. But AMD promised 4 years of support, they said. It's your money and it's your PC. If you want to buy a Ryzen 9 5900X and drop it into your Asus Prime X370 Pro motherboard, be my guest. If you're happy with the results, rock on. I've personally done it enough times now that I'm no longer even bothering to try. A new B550 motherboard, such as this ASRock Steel Legend, can be had for $140. It supports up to DDR4 4733 RAM. It has a 14-phase digital power delivery system, USB 3.2 Gen 2 support, multiple M.2 slots, 2.5 gig Ethernet, ALC 1220 audio, and more. The existing Asus board can be sold for about $70, making it $70 to upgrade to a new generation motherboard, remove all the headaches. For my own peace of mind and my own sanity, I am happy to spend the $70, but that's just me. Let's move on to the system memory. This was built with 16 gigabytes of RAM, not because I think that's ideal today. Heck, I didn't think that was ideal in 2018, but let's not go there right now. It was done to hold the price to $1,000 even at the time. It is very much time to move to 32 gigabytes of RAM at the least. If you are watching tech YouTube channels, you're probably the type of user who has been due for this for a while if you haven't done it already. Of course, if you've already upgraded, then congrats. You can just bring your existing RAM over to the new motherboard. It won't be as fast as new RAM, but it's not enough of a difference to matter given the costs. However, if you haven't upgraded, may I suggest buying all new RAM and selling your existing RAM with your motherboard and CPU as a matched working set. Think about it. Somebody who is still on an FX CPU or Sandy Bridge or something older may very well find a Ryzen 7 1700X to be an awesome upgrade. Selling them just the CPU or just the board doesn't help as much as selling them a matched set of CPU, motherboard, and RAM that you know for a fact works together. That means your only real question now is 32 gigabytes or 64 gigabytes of RAM. The short version of this advice is if you're going with another 8-core CPU for whatever reason, maybe you've decided to buy a Ryzen 7 3700X or 5700X, I understand, then 32 gigabytes is enough. If you're going towards a Ryzen 9 CPU or an i9 CPU, now that they've dropped in price, may I suggest 64 gigabytes. Now, most of you don't need 64 gigabytes today. That is a true statement. But you will grow into it over the next 4 years, and you will be glad that you have it. In addition, it's only $100 more right now to get 64 gigabytes over 32 gigabytes. You can get a matched set of RAM that works on day one and forever without ever having to worry about mixing and matching RAM in the future. Let's move on to the storage, shall we? The 480 gigabyte SATA SSD that was included in the original build was honestly not great even in 2018. It was there only to hit the price point being targeted. You would be doing yourself a great disservice to continue using this as a boot drive in 2022. Now, you could keep it as a data or game drive if you like, but you really should have a 1 terabyte or preferably 2 terabyte NVMe boot drive, something that is TLC, SLC cache, and DRAM buffered. The Samsung 980 Pro is awesome. The Crucial P5 Plus is another great choice, and it certainly costs less than the Samsung Drive. Other options exist, of course, but don't bother with anything cheaper or worse than those choices given the small price gap that now exists in the 1 and 2 terabyte drive size ranges. Side note regarding storage, if you take any advice from me whatsoever, it should be on storage. All of these boxes are empty. I have used every drive you see on the desk right now in one form or another. I have done multiple SSD comparisons, SATA, NVMe, RAID, and more. I've used them as boot drives, data drives, video editing drives, game drives, and more. I probably have more direct experience with SSDs than anything else, certainly in terms of breadth and depth of experience between a variety of drives. A couple years ago, I did a video on like 24 of these Intel 660p NVMe drives, and at the time, they were a really good deal. They aren't today because they just don't save you enough money anymore. They were half the price of Samsung drives back then. Today, they're $20 less, maybe $30 less. It's not a big deal. The 660p drives are QLC, meaning 4 bits per cell. They do have a DRAM buffer, which is nice, but they definitely fall apart in terms of transfer rate and performance once you overrun their SLC cache, which they do have, which basically all QLC drives we're talking about do. That being said, prices have dropped. Right now, as I'm recording this, a 2 terabyte Gen 4 premium NVMe Crucial P5 Plus that does nearly 7 gigabytes per second. Not gigabits, gigabytes. That thing is a beast. $199. The 1 terabyte version is a little bit more than $100, making its price per terabyte not quite as good, but it's currently about $120. Now, you can find 1 terabyte drives for less than $100, but we're talking about the cost of a nice lunch, maybe a dinner, between a DRAM-less QLC low-end drive with terrible performance and endurance specs versus the Crucial P5 Plus, one of the best NVMe drives currently available on the market today. If you're bothering to buy a drive, 1 or 2 terabytes, don't buy cheap. This is the last place you want to save $30 on your new build in 2022. Let's talk about the case. It works, it's fine, it exists. But of all the parts that I put into this build, the case was one of the most disappointing. It's a great example of why trying to save $50 on your case just makes for a frustrating build experience and a PC that's not as nice to live with. I have had to keep the side panel off this machine its entire life in order to keep it cool and keep the fans from spinning at crazy speeds. What's the point of a case that has such poor airflow that you have to do that? Spend a bit more, get a decent case. $100 buys you way more case than $50 does. Consider it an investment in your sanity. Let's talk about the power supply, another great example of where saving $50 bites you in the end. The 500 watt power supply worked well enough for the 2070 and the 1700X. However, when I tried replacing the 2070 with a 3070, I ran into problems. It worked at first for a while, then I started getting random shutdowns of the machine, and after a few months of that, it simply refused to turn back on. As I'm recording this PC is actually dead because the power supply simply will not turn on. I've actually pulled the video card and the RAM and the SSDs out and used them in other machines. Yes, everything works fine, but the power supply is dead. Had I installed a 600 watt 80 plus bronze, such as this unit right here, instead of the 500 watt 80 plus white, it would almost certainly still be running perfectly fine, and that would have cost maybe $15 more back in 2018. Those who are cheap pay twice. Perfect example, this case. Now, having said that, raise your hand if you think even 600 watts is going to be enough going forward. NVIDIA has already said that 1,000 watt power supplies are recommended for the new RTX 3090 Ti. Yes, I know most of you aren't buying that, but Rumors are the 40 series will use up to 50% more power than the 30 series. This means that an RTX 4070 is likely to require a 750 watt power supply with a recommendation of at least an 850 watt power supply. So naturally, a good power supply replacement is definitely needed here. Moving on to the CPU cooler, the Ryzen 7 1700X didn't come with one. Come to think of it, none of the Ryzen CPUs come with one today. Yes, I know the Ryzen 5 5600X does, but since none of you should buy a 5600X in 2022, none of the current Ryzen CPUs come with a cooler. Now, I included a super cheap 120mm all-in-one liquid cooler from EVGA. You can see it installed right there. It did the job, and at the time, it was about the same price as a Hyper 212 Evo from Cooler Master. It was like $30 or $35, a crazy cheap price for a liquid cooler. It did the job, and it does cool a 1700X. It will not cool a Ryzen 9, either the 5900X or a 5950X, it just won't. And it will only marginally cool a 5800X. You will need to upgrade the cooler, unless you already put something in better when you built this. Now, if you are on a budget or you don't want liquid cooling, the Scythe Fuma 2 here is really nice. I would totally put a Scythe Fuma 2 on a Ryzen 9 5900X. I would not put one on a 5950X. A 5950X deserves all the cooling. 280 or 360 liquid cooler or a Noctua NHD 15, anything less and you're just shortchanging yourself, and the price difference doesn't matter once you're at that budget. But a Fuma 2 on a 5900X is just fine. Or a 240 or 280 millimeter liquid cooler would be just fine on a 5900X as well. But you will need to replace a 120 if that's what you went with. Those of you who have followed our channel for years probably already know where this is headed. You really shouldn't upgrade this PC at all. You should sell it as a working system and build a new one. Over time, as I look back on all of my builds, upgrades, and advice over the years, even going back further than our YouTube channel's existence, I'm struck with a key observation that rings true more often than not. Upgrading a PC that needs more than one or two parts is rarely worth the trouble. Now, if you're just adding some RAM or adding storage or upgrading your GPU, sure thing, go for it. Those are quick and easy upgrades that can take 5 minutes. If you need a new CPU, a new motherboard, if you need a new power supply, or frankly, if you need, like this PC needs, everything replaced, then what are you really saving? Sure, you could keep the RAM and maybe reuse your GPU, maybe you could reuse the storage, perhaps you could even live with the existing liquid cooler, or maybe you built your system with a better cooler than this has in there. But you're replacing more than half of the PC. You're spending most of the cost of a new PC, and you're still left with just one PC and some spare parts left over. If you just build a new PC, you end up with two working PCs at the end of it. A complete system to keep as a spare or sell as a complete working machine. Now, if you still want to upgrade this, you simply perhaps can't afford a new PC today, what do you do? Well, I wouldn't buy a Ryzen 7 2700X at the current eBay prices. The difference, as of recording of this video, between a 2700X and a 3700X is simply too small. Now, I'm aware that I said earlier in this video that I would not put a 3700X on this board, and I wouldn't. But if you want to take the chance, a 3700X is about $200 on eBay at the moment, and a 3700X is a solid improvement over the 1700X that is in here. You can sell your 1700X for between $100 to $125 and make that a pretty cost-effective upgrade to buy you some more time. It will definitely lift some of the CPU bottleneck off of your graphics card. I would also upgrade the RAM to 32 gigabytes if you have not done so already. A 16 gigabyte kit is about $50 at the moment, and that is a cheap way to make your PC feel smoother and more responsive. I would buy a 1 terabyte Crucial P5 Western Digital Black SN750, non-special edition, or a Samsung 970 EVO Plus for around $120, and I would make it my new boot drive. You can clone Windows over to it, or you can do a fresh install, which after 4 years, maybe do at this point. Anything more than that, you might as well build a new PC. Now, for those of you curious, what do I plan to do with this? After I finish filming this video, I'm going to remove everything from the case. I'm going to sell the CPU and the motherboard. The RAM and SSD have already been removed. The power supply and the case will get recycled. The power supply isn't worth the cost of shipping to RMA it, even if EVGA would replace it. And the case, well, it isn't worth the time of day to do anything with. It really is kind of a bad case. The liquid cooler will go on my shelf as an interesting display piece. It really doesn't have any value on its own anymore, and I wouldn't install a 120 liquid cooler on anything today, so it is what it is. I don't actually have the EVGA 2070 Black anymore. It was sold a year or two ago. Several other cards have been in there since then. Most recently, the EVGA 3070 XC3 Black up until the power supply died. Well, rest in peace, computer. You served your purpose. I expect to get about $250 for the 4 items I will ultimately sell out of this machine: the motherboard, the CPU, and then the RAM and the storage, which I've already removed, but I do have those to sell. The net loss from this build overall was $250 out of $1,000 spent. Actually, pretty reasonable for a 3.5-year-old build that was kind of cheap to begin with. There's another way to look at this. $250 divided by 42 months of ownership is $6 per month. Raise your hand if you think $6 a month is a great price to own a nice Ryzen 7 PC with an RTX 2070 in it from November of 2018 to April of 2022.
URCity Keys is the best source for genuine Windows and Office Professional product keys that work the first time, every time. Get 20% off their already amazing prices using our code TD20 and the link in the video description below. $15 gets you a Windows Professional OEM key that is a real product key and activates directly with Microsoft. Or get a full copy of Office 2019 Professional Plus for $50 that redeems at setup.office.com using your Microsoft account. Or why not both? And the nice thing, use them forever as they link directly to your Microsoft account and work through reinstalls. We have been using URCity Keys for over 3 years now and highly recommend them.
Thank you all so much for watching to the very end. 2 gold stars to all of you for still being here. Like this video if you like it, share it with your friends if you love it. Remember to subscribe to the channel with the big huge red button directly below. Hit the bell notification icon to be notified when new videos come out. Follow us on Twitter. Our Discord link is down in the video description below. Use that to follow us and find out when we're going to be either live streaming or posting new videos or just deals that I tend to post on both Discord and Twitter from time to time when something good comes up, such as the Ryzen 9 5900X for $379, which was the current price as of the time of recording this. That is nearly $200 off the launch price of $550, which is not bad for a 12-core CPU. It's actually cheaper than the Ryzen 7 5800X launched for. That's not bad. There are links in the video description below, links to the original playlist of this, which had 3 videos on it, if you'd like to go check those out. Links to eBay, Newegg, and Amazon. Those are affiliate links. If you want to buy anything to upgrade your machine or build a machine, if you click one of those links before you go shopping, makes no difference what you actually end up buying. It does support the channel at no extra cost to you, and it is a great way to support the channel proactively if you like our content and you want us to still be here, because affiliate links are honestly one of the best no-cost to you ways of supporting YouTube channels. Thank you all so much for watching. I will see all of you next time. Hello and welcome to techdeals. Take 2, part 1. And at what point is it worth just selling the entire and building? And I wrote the words. This featured the Ryzen. It really can't reach. Do keep in mind that if you upgrade today, you're getting back 90% of what you paid for your 2070 at current market prices. So is there. Blah. You know, don't tell anybody I said this, but life is entirely too short to use crappy computers. The Ryzen 9 chips are awesome. The Intel chips are awesome. Build either one, you have a computer for years. This is the why you should listen to me on storage display. Every one of these is an empty box. Hello and welcome to Tech Deals, or rather I should say Bite-Sized Tech. This is the first dedicated bite-sized tech that we've ever recorded on our main filming desk, and I'm doing this in the middle of another video because I thought I'm going to try something different. And I could do that because it's our channel. So this is a large collection of SSDs. In order to keep this short and sweet, let me give you the TLD version. TLD. Damn it. Take two for bite-sized tech.